Dam Safety Modification Study public meeting. My name is Jeff Greenwald. I'm a planner and a project manager with the Omaha District Corps of Engineers. Omaha District is conducting a dam safety modification study at Snake Creek Embankment in central North Dakota. And this is our public scoping meeting. And we'd like to give a presentation about the study. It was recently initiated, and we look forward to sharing it with you and receiving any public input that you might have. The purpose of this meeting is to give you an overview of the dam safety modification study, including its purpose, and to receive comments from you. So again, welcome, and my name's Jeff. And so this is an overview of the public meeting format and its and the presentation. Right after this slide, we're going to have some opening remarks from a senior leader in the district. I'll go over the Webex tools and the meeting formalities, and then we'll go into the operation of Snake Creek Embankment. We'll talk about the dam safety problems and issues associated with it. We'll talk about the alternatives that we've formulated to date, and then have a time at the end for public comment. So I'd like to start by introducing Mr. Pete Sturdivant, who's the chief of our engineering and construction division, and he's also the Omaha District Dam Safety Officer. Mr. Sturdivant, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. I just want to do a quick sound and video check. Over.
Sound is good, and also video is good.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for your interest and attendance at this public meeting for the Snake Creek Embankment Dam Safety Modification Study. As Jeff said, I'm Peter Sturdivant, the Chief of Engineering and the Dam Safety Officer for the Omaha District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Tonight, my team is tasked with informing you on the study status and progress, and I believe their presentation does a fantastic job of explaining the 5 W's, particularly the why. The USACE appreciates the coordination and close partnership with the Bureau of Rec and the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District, and we consider everyone with an interest in this effort a stakeholder and partner. First and foremost, the Snake Creek Embankment is a safe dam. It is not in danger of imminent failure, and potential loss of life caused by an embankment failure is very, very low. But the economic impacts to the state of North Dakota could be significant. This study is unique to our typical dam safety modification studies and focuses on the economic impacts of an embankment failure, as well as economic impacts of implementation of a pool restriction between Lake Sacagawea and Lake Audubon, which was implemented in 2019 through a water control manual update. A typical dam safety modification study focuses on life safety. As part of the study, the Corps is analyzing the frequency of droughts in the region that could result in the Corps having to implement the pool restriction and the economic impacts to the state water supply projects that would result from those actions. The drought in the early 2000s was the closest the embankment came to this loading condition. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Omaha District understands the importance of the maintaining pool at Lake Audubon to provide water supply and irrigation to eastern parts of North Dakota, and the potential economic impacts it would cause if the Snake Creek Embankment pool restriction were implemented or the embankment were to fail. This effort directly supports the current administration priorities, including solutions for Snake Creek that build climate resiliency for North Dakota. Our bottom line goal here is to ensure USACE infrastructure is performing safely and risks are being reduced and managed. This concludes my comments. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and I look forward to the presentation and discussions. And with that, I would like to turn it back to Jeff Greenwald. Thank you.
Sorry, Amy, I was on double mute. Thank you. So great. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Sturdivant. And I would just like to recognize a few other people within the district and the team quickly. Mr. Drew Miner is the chief of the Omaha District Planning Branch. Mr. Todd Lindquist, who I see is on the call, he's the operations project manager for the project. On the study team, we've also got a couple people on the line that I'd like to recognize. Rebecca Petkudka, she is our lead environmental resource specialist. Ryan Lee, he's our lead engineer. Amy Eccles is our public involvement specialist and facilitator. And then there's a couple agencies that we'd like to recognize as well that we've been cooperating with. As Mr. Sturdivant alluded to, we've been partnering or cooperating with the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation on this study. And at this time, I'd like to request that acknowledgement from any congressionals or staff of any congressionals who are in attendance. And you're welcome to come off mute and introduce yourself. Or I see we have in the chat here, that works too. Chris, Mr. Marhall, Senior Policy Advisor for U.S. Senator Kevin Kramer. Is there anybody else from a congressional office on the line? Great, thanks, Mr. Marhall, for attending. At this time, I would also like to request acknowledgement from any tribal representatives in attendance who can introduce themselves. Okay, not hearing anybody or seeing any in the chat. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So just a few meeting formalities before we get started. Please mute your phones until the public comment portion of the meeting. It can cause some echoes and it can be hard to hear sometimes when phones aren't muted. We are accepting public comments at the end following the presentation, and we'll be accepting them verbally. And you'll also have information if you'd like to provide comments.
We appreciate your patience as we work to keep our...
I'm getting some feedback from someone. Sounds like it's gone. So we are accepting comments in writing, and you can do that either through the chat. There's a chat feature that I'll go over here in a minute, or you may do that via some contact information that we'll provide. And at the end, we'll give instructions on getting in the queue to speak following the presentation. We will be including the chat comments in the public record. And we've got an hour and a half today. I think that should be plenty of time to answer the questions, and everybody who'd like to have a chance to speak will have a chance. And then, like I said, we'll have email and mailing address for written comments that'll be provided at the end of the meeting. And just another note, this meeting is being recorded, and it will be in the public or in the study record. So it'll be transcribed and part of the study record. Just want to make people aware of that. Okay. And just for those of you who are new to the Webex tool, this is just going to give you a quick walkthrough. It's a pretty basic tutorial. I can get the prompts to go. So there's a mute button at the bottom that you can use to mute and unmute yourself. As I just showed you, you might run into a double mute situation if you're using a phone for your audio. So be aware of that. And then to turn your video on and off, there's a video button. And then to see who's all on this call, you can click on the participant tab in the bottom right. And those who call in using the call-in information rather than the Webex link, they'll just show up as a phone number. Looks like we've got a few phone numbers on just up there today. And then to open the chat, you click on the chat box. Okay, so just to quickly orient everybody, the Snake Creek Embankment is located in central North Dakota. It's northeast of Garrison Dam. Lake Sakakawea is on the west side of the embankment. Lake Audubon is on the east side of the embankment. The McCluskey Canal is at the southeast end of the lake. And then there's a pump station on the west side of the embankment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the embankment itself runs north-south through the Snake Creek arm of Lake Sakakawea. The project itself, it was authorized, the Snake Creek Embankment was authorized to provide a relocation route for highway, railroad, and certain utilities to get across one side of the reservoir to the other. And then it was also authorized to serve as a sub-impoundment dam for water supply, wildlife, recreation, and diversion of water to eastern North Dakota. The Corps of Engineers is the project owner. The project is operated in cooperation with the Bureau of Reclamation, the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. The Bureau of Rec and the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District, they operate the Snake Creek pumping plant, and that's what's in this picture here. And that plant diverts water from Lake Sakakawea to Lake Audubon. And the idea there is to keep Lake Audubon at a fairly constant level so that it can supply water to the McCluskey Canal and also meet those environmental purposes. And you can see on this graphic here in the bottom right, there's the canal is labeled. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they manage the Audubon National Wildlife Refuge, which is shown here. The North Dakota Game and Fish manages the state game management area, which is also shown. And the Corps of Engineers' responsibility is really to maintain the integrity of the embankment. So why are we here? So there is a dam safety concern that's been identified by the Omaha District at Snake Creek Embankment. It was identified between 2000 and 2009 during a drought when the differential between the two lakes reached 41 feet approximately. During the drought, the difference in water levels between Lake Sakakawea and Lake Audubon, they did pass historical records. And that is because we do keep Lake Audubon at artificially high, and we were in a drought, so Lake Sakakawea fell. And what the Corps did at the time is we increased our monitoring and surveillance while the Lake Sakakawea levels were low, and we identified dam safety concerns. We did implement some temporary measures to manage those concerns at the time. We put in a pool restriction. We added some relief wells and some other dam safety equipment, some piezometers. But really, those things expired. They were temporary measures to manage the risk. And so after that drought, we did do a seepage analysis and made a determination that there's a potential for adverse under seepage conditions that could lead to failure of Snake Creek Embankment when the pool differentials exceed 43 feet. And so in response to that, in 2019, the Lake Audubon Water Control Manual was updated to implement a pool restriction of no greater than 43 feet between Lake Sakakawea and Lake Audubon. And just one quick note on water control manuals. Projects like this have what we call a water control manual. And it's an important thing. It's an important tool because it provides the operational instructions to personnel involved in managing the reservoir. And it's really especially important because it provides clear instructions on what's to be done during an emergency situation. So since the 2019 pool restriction, there have been some additional state and federally authorized water supply projects that rely on water delivery from McCluskey Canal that have been approved. Most notably the Eastern North Dakota Alternate Water Supply Project. And so that's increased the benefits that are coming from Lake Audubon into the canal. And in addition to that, Congress has passed legislation that's directed the Corps of Engineers to reevaluate the 2019 Water Control Manual update and to consider the impact of the pool restriction on these water supply projects. And that was passed in a Water Resource Development Act bill of 2020. And that legislation also says that we are to assess an array of structural and operational measures to address the dam safety risk. This is an overview of how we would operate during a drought scenario under the existing water control manual that I just described. So I'm just going to walk through this graphic and some of the information on it. The dam crest currently sits at elevation 1865, and Lake Sakakawea is on the left side of the graphic. Lake Audubon's on the right side of the graphic. The normal pool range for Lake Audubon is 1845 to 1847, and the normal pool range for Lake Sakakawea ranges from about 1835 to 1847. And this shows the record pool level for Lake Sakakawea, which was experienced in 2005 during the drought. And it's 1806. And if Lake Sakakawea were to actually fall to 1804, that would result in a 43-foot differential between Lake Audubon, assuming 1847 is the pool elevation. And the Corps at that point would potentially lower the pool of Lake Audubon to manage the risk in accordance with that pool restriction that says we can't exceed 43 feet. And so relative to this graph, I guess today, like right now, just for reference, I believe a week ago we were at 1845 in Lake Audubon, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head anymore. I think actually I do. I think it's 1827 or 1826 as of March 17th is where Lake Sakakawea was. So now I'm just gonna, so this graphic here, I should say, this shows a typical cross section of the dam, and I'm gonna walk through the under seepage issues that I've referred to a little bit with you. These are the dam safety issues that we've identified. And so this is what happens when you have a high Lake Audubon pool, which is on the right, and a low Lake Sakakawea pool, which is on the left. The force of the, well, I guess I should say the elevation difference drives seepage under the dam, and that's this blue arrow here. So then the force of that seepage creates heaves and cracks in the foundation embankment on the opposite side of the embankment. And that's these vertical red arrows that are pointing up. And then ultimately what happens is seepage carries or erodes the foundation sands that are underneath the embankment. And it creates a tunnel, or what we refer to sometimes as a pipe, beneath the embankment. And then if that continues, the tunnel becomes large enough that the dam collapses into it and the embankment is breached. And that's when Lake Audubon would flow into Lake Sakakawea. This graphic shows the locations where we are concerned that potential underseepage conditions exist. There are 3 locations. Just realized my video was off. I'm going to turn that on. So there's 3 locations. There's one in the vicinity of the pump station. So this is the embankment running across the graphic here. This is the north end on the left, and this is the pump station that USBR and GDCD operate. And that pumps water from Lake Sac over to here. So these red lines are the potential underseepage paths that the Corps has identified through its risk assessments. And there's 3 of them, and one of them is located here in the vicinity of the pump intake channel. There's another one that's located in what we refer to as the North Valley. And then there's a third one that's located in what we refer to as the South Valley. And each of these 3 underseepage paths is being evaluated further in the dam safety modification study. And we have collected some new data. The Corps uses a variety of data to conduct its risk assessments. So we've collected some geotechnical borings last fall to help inform this. And then we also collected some bathymetry and some other elevation data to help inform our risk assessments. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the consequences of an embankment failure. And in a dam safety modification study, we always consider what the consequences of a dam failure would be. And it's an important part of how we estimate risk. And so I will just quickly kind of define risk, just because we're using that term a lot. It's the way that we define it, it's the accepted way of understanding it in the emergency management profession and the dam safety profession. And it's a function of, risk is a function of probability of failure and consequences of failure. And when I say probability of failure, I'm referring to the likelihood of a dam failure. And failure is referring to an uncontrolled release of water. And the consequences of failure are the effects that a failure would have on the public, property, and or the environment. And so I'll talk about each one with respect to this project. This slide does summarize the potential consequences of a failure of Snake Creek. And so the life safety consequences, we feel like it's very unlikely that there would be life safety consequences at this project. The embankment failure itself would likely be slow to develop. The population at risk really consists of the individuals who are using the embankment to get from one side to the other, and then also the in-water, the folks that would potentially be in the water near a location of a breach. And so again, from a life safety perspective, we feel like this is a safe project, and it's unlikely that there would be life safety consequences. In terms of economic consequences, that's where there's a potential for significant effects to occur. The first bullet here, this is where we capture, what we're doing in the study, I should say, is capturing the economic cost to repair the embankment if it were to fail, and then all the infrastructure that sits on it, the highway, the railroad, there's utilities that run across it. We're also looking at the economic consequences of lost water supply benefits. There's multiple water supply projects that are linked to this embankment. 2 of them shown here, the Central North Dakota Water Supply Project, that's the first acronym. That's a project that was authorized to provide water from McCluskey Canal to Central North Dakota. And then the Eastern North Dakota Alternate Water Supply Project, that's another water supply project that authorized water into the canal for Central and Eastern North Dakota. And then there's a third project as well that we're aware of. It's called the Northwest Area Water Supply Project. And that project is a little bit different than the other two in that it pulls water out of Lake Sakakawea through a conduit that goes through the embankment and then takes water north to north central North Dakota for water supply purposes. And so in that instance, we're concerned with if the embankment were to fail, it could release sediments and cover the intake in Lake Sakakawea and impact that project. With the other two, if the embankment were to fail, obviously that would impact the ability to get water into the canal. But also if we're lowering the pool in accordance with the water control pool restriction, we could have impacts to those projects as well. And so we're looking at that. And then another thing that we look at is we look at the economic impact of traffic and railroad detours and delays. If the embankment were to fail, there would be obviously that route, that corridor, that travel corridor would be shut down, and people would have to take a longer route to get around the Snake Creek arm of the lake. And then we look at the economic impact of recreation as well, the lost recreation. And then environmental consequences, that's something that we also consider. And so I pointed out the environmental resources in Lake Audubon previously, and we've got the State Wildlife Management Area and the National Wildlife Refuge. So in the dam safety study, these are the planning objectives and constraints. And I'll go over the objectives first. And the first objective is to identify and recommend a risk management plan that supports the expeditious and cost-effective reduction of risk. The second objective is to ensure that core infrastructure is reliably contributing to meeting all federally authorized purposes dependent on Snake Creek embankment for the full range of loading conditions. And then the third objective is to reduce the likelihood that the core operations have adverse impacts on local and state water supply projects and also environmental purposes. And so I'll talk a little bit about constraints. These are things that we develop within our study process that we cannot violate. And a lot of times we don't list out, like, it's implied that we're just going to follow the law and follow regulations and not violate things like that. But because we have specific legislation for this study that was recently passed, we are listing it out as a specific thing that we're following. And so the study must comply with Section 149 of the worded 2020 legislation that I mentioned earlier. And that basically says, like I mentioned, that the Corps will reevaluate the 2019 Water Control Manual update and also evaluate other operational and structural alternatives for this project to reduce risk. And so we're complying with that. And then the second constraint here, not too worried that this doesn't seem like something that we're really at risk of violating in terms of a study constraint, but we don't want to have any impacts on reservoir operations at Garrison Dam. And that's not, I don't think that's an issue for us, but we just want to make sure that any alternatives that we formulate stick to that. So these are the risk management measures that we identified to address the problems and the issues and meet the objectives. And the way that we do this in our study process is we start out with what we call management measures, risk management measures, and we do what we screen them, and then we'll form these are the building blocks of our alternative, our plans. And so the first 5 measures on this list, these are all things that we would do along the embankment or in the area adjacent to the embankment. And for the most part, these things were all screened out because they were less effective at reducing risk or more costly than the ones we carried forward. And then I do want to highlight these two here. These are the dredging of the McCluskey Canal Inlet and the construction of a McCluskey Canal pipeline and pump plant were other things that we looked at. These would be implemented over by the canal and not by the embankment. And they were eliminated for a variety of reasons. They don't specifically address the under seepage issues at the embankment. The risk at Snake Creek Embankment would continue to be managed through the existing water control manual. They do have high construction costs. There's some operational and maintenance considerations that would also add to the cost. And then because we would be doing a lot of heavy construction over by the wildlife refuge, they have significant environmental impacts. And so the 4 measures that we carried forward were cutoff walls, seepage uplift berms, filter berms, and those are all structural things that we would build. And then the 4th one is elimination of the pool threshold. And so these are the measures that we carried forward to combine into alternatives that are shown on this slide. And so this is what we refer to as our final array of risk management plans that we're evaluating in the study. And the first one is no action. And that's an important scenario in any planning study, any core planning study. It's the baseline condition, really. It's the basis of comparison for the other action alternatives. So that's the first alternative, and that would retain the pool restriction. The second alternative is to eliminate the pool restriction, and that's a standalone operational alternative. And then the third and the fourth alternatives are structural alternatives that are combined with eliminating the pool restriction. And 3 is berms, constructing seepage or filter berms, and 4 is cutoff walls. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So alternative 1, this is the no action scenario, which I said is an important scenario in any planning study that's used as the basis of comparison for the alternatives. And in this study, for no action, we assumed that the 2019 Water Control Manual pool restriction would remain in place. If the pool differential reaches 43 feet, then lowering of Lake Audubon is possible. And based on some preliminary analysis that we've done, we're showing that it's approximately a 1 in 18 chance each year that Lake Audubon pool is lowered in accordance with the existing pool restriction, which is about a 5.5% chance each year. And as I've mentioned, the lowering of the pool has potential to impact state and federal projects, the projects that are federally authorized to provide water to the canal, the state and federal wildlife areas, and then there's also recreation impacts associated with this alternative. The second alternative is elimination of the pool restriction. And this would eliminate the existing pool restriction. In order for us to select this alternative, our risk assessment results in the study would have to indicate that the risk of embankment failure is low enough where a pool restriction is not necessary. And so we've collected some new data to help kind of inform whether this is a good alternative. Like I mentioned, we collected some new soil borings and some elevation and bathymetry data. And so we have new data so that we have better data to kind of evaluate this one. If we were to select it, we would follow our process for changing the water control manual. And kind of lastly on this one, it would not eliminate the risk of the unknown. There's always the chance that you could get a significant rainfall event like 10 inches of rain or or something big that would slough the embankment, for example, and that could cause us to take emergency measures. So I just want to point that out. It would not eliminate risk of the unknown. So this is alternative 3. And the idea here is to construct seepage or we talked about the filter berms as well in these locations here to prevent seepage exits from forming. And these areas here show where these seepage berms would be constructed, these black dotted lines. And so they are kind of located strategically at the downstream exit of the seepage paths that I showed you earlier. And I think I've got, yeah, so placement of material is focused on the likely exits of seepage in the foundation blanket. And so if you remember those red lines from earlier in the presentation, this is Lake Audubon on top, this is Lake Sakakawea on the bottom. These blankets would be placed where we think there's a potential for this uplift or this heave to occur in the foundation blanket. Alternative 4, this is cutoff walls and elimination of the pool restriction. And this alternative here, the idea is to construct vertical cutoff walls on the Lake Audubon side. And these would be intended to block seepage paths underneath the embankment. And it's the same thing that I showed earlier. We've got those 3 red lines that you can kind of picture where one was here going into the intake channel, one in the North Valley, one in the South Valley. And the cutoff walls would be intended to block seepage under the embankment. And so that's an overview of our alternatives. And we're getting kind of close to the end of the presentation here. And so as we kind of get to the public comment portion, I'd like you to think about what considerations are important to you as we evaluate the impacts of the final array of risk management plans. And this lists them out again: no action, eliminate pool restriction, berms plus eliminate pool restriction, cutoff walls plus eliminate pool restriction. And then examples of things that you might consider as you think about these and things that would be helpful in our evaluation are life safety issues, water supply issues, climate change issues, recreational uses, open space access, biological and cultural resource effects, and property protection. This is our study schedule. Just want to present this. Right now we are in this alternatives analysis phase where we're developing these 4 alternatives, and that lasts until approximately July. And then once we get through that, we're in what we refer to as a draft report stage, where we're developing the environmental assessment. And that's really, at that point, we have kind of tentatively selected a preferred alternative, and we're refining the design, refining the cost. We're doing internal reviews of our work and getting agency concurrence within the Corps on our selected plan. And then we anticipate that the public review of the draft environmental assessment would be in early 2023. So I'm showing January or February-ish on the slide here. And then final approval of the report would follow that in approximately June. And also, you're welcome to put chats or comments into the chat, and those will also be included in the public record. To enter a verbal comment queue, type in the chat that you'd like to speak or add me to the list, and then we'll take to the request in the order that they're received in the chat. And it's optional, but if you'd like, include your name and affiliation. And we've got a facilitator, Amy, who's going to help kind of manage the the order, and she'll announce the name, and then we'll do our best to answer the question. So yeah, don't forget to unmute yourself, and yeah, and then as a reminder, this is being recorded. And so this slide here, you also have the opportunity to submit written comments. We're asking for comments by April 23rd, 2022. And those comments can be emailed to this email address or mailed to this address. And we will also be posting this PowerPoint on our study website, which can be found on the Omaha District webpage. And for those of you who found out about this meeting through the press release, the link to that website was in the press release. So I want to thank you for your attention, and also thank you again for attending. And I think at this time, we'd like to open up the meeting to public comments.
So Jeff, we don't have any public comments specifically so far, but yes, Dave, I'll catch you just a sec. We do have a question earlier on from Mr. Gunch about the economic impacts to irrigation systems, existing or future, weren't listed in the impacts. Do you want to address that, Jeff?
Yeah, so we are looking at that, and that's an oversight in the slides, I believe, more than anything. But we are looking at the types of uses for the water, and irrigation is one of the uses of water from the canal. And so that's handled as that type of use, and we're looking at that.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Well, we do have two folks with requests to speak and some input here. What I'll do is we'll open it up to Dave, and then Mr. Smith, Dave Carlson and Tyler Smith, and then we'll go to anybody on the phone. Since you can't really put your name in the chat queue, we will turn to the phone after we open up to Mr. Carlson and Mr. Smith. Go ahead, Mr. Carlson.
I think you might be on mute, Mr. Carlson.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm on my phone and computer audio, so here we go. First of all, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Jeff, your presentation tonight has been very well presented, a lot of detail, and we appreciate that. I'm on the board for the Lake Audubon Cabin Site Association, and there's always a lot of questions when the Army Corps of Engineers and other departments start talking about water levels between Lake Sakakawea, Lake Audubon, and so on. When I first started listening to your presentation tonight, I was concerned that this would be like impacting us this year because of Lake Sakakawea being low and we're in a drought and everything else. However, am I correct in saying that this is a plan for the future, maybe not just this summer? So I'll throw that question out to you now, and then I have a couple other questions. But if you could answer that question, this is something for the future, maybe not just this summer. Am I correct in that?
Yes. So, yeah, so we're looking at ways to ensure that our embankment is performing well. And the way that it's being operated now to manage that performance is through this water control pool restriction that was implemented in 2019. And so while we're studying it, yeah, you know, if we were to get in a really bad drought while the study is happening, there's a possibility that we would have to implement that pool restriction if the differential was at 43 feet between Lake Audubon and Lake Sakakawea. If we were to Yeah.
Yeah, this is Todd Lundquist, the operations manager. Hey,
Yeah.
Dave, yeah, for this year, we're following the forecast from our water management division, and our median forecast shows that we're about at our low pool and we should come up. And we're tracking our lower basic, which shows that we could potentially get to 1826. So we would still be 20 feet above the elevation where any restrictions would be implemented this year. So to summarize, yes, we should not see any impacts this year.
Okay, thank you, because that was going to be my next question is that, you know, right now the lake is at 1845. As of March 17th, we're about 1826. So really, Sakakawea would have to drop like 20 more feet before this would really go into effect, correct? At least that's the plan, okay?
Yep,
And
you're right.
Okay, I did see a similar presentation like this in Bismarck live probably about 4 or 5 years ago when this is all discussed. And it kind of piqued our interest, but we knew that, you know, it takes a while for these studies to happen. And then I have a couple other questions, if that's okay. I don't want to go over my 3-minute time limit, but what steps are being taken to reduce the flow of the river to slow the reduction of Lake Sakakawea?
Well, I mean, I guess those would be better answered by our water management division, but I guess from what operations we're seeing, we are in drought conservation measures. We are at a reduced release from the power plant, so we have reduced power production. And based on the current forecast, it looks like there will be a reduction in the navigation service level and likely a reduction in the length of the navigation season as well. There'll be a lot more, I guess, detailed information and the right people to speak to at our public meetings for the annual operating plan. And that is currently scheduled for April 11th in Bismarck at the National Energy Center in Bismarck State College. And I can check on the time. I believe that's Monday evening, but let me pull up my email and I will post that in the chat.
All right, and then one last question, if that's okay. I think Mr. Tyler Smith also has a question regarding this to a point, but for a seepage berm, how do you construct a seepage berm? What does it look like? How long does it take to build? Can you give us a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah, I might go to Ryan Lee, who's our lead engineer on the study. Ryan, are you there?
Yep. So the concept for a seepage berm is usually would be constructed on land, and you would dump, truck some material, and then spread it out and compact it. In this case, we're not going to draw down the lake to construct it, so it will be built underwater. And we started looking into how we might do that, and it's likely to be from a barge, and we would control the spread of sediment into the lake. And I saw there is.
Great.
Thank you.
Tyler Smith has a couple questions here. I'm going to read them out for those of you who are on the phone, and then this may be a Ryan question as well. And then we'll go to the phone and then to Ken. I don't have a last name for you here, but you have a question after we open it up to the phone. So Mr. Smith asks, he states he has a cabin on Lake Audubon, and with either alternative, 3 or 4, will the berms or cutoff walls be visible above the water? Follow-up question, will there be any lasting impacts to the fisheries or migratory birds with these options? So perhaps Ryan first and Rebecca for the second question.
Sure. So neither of those alternatives would be permanently visible. You'd see the construction equipment out during the work, but neither would leave a lasting visible feature. and then we'd ensure that work wouldn't cause any impacts to the fisheries or birds. And Rebecca would make sure that maybe you can add some comment there.
Good evening. This is Rebecca Kuka. So we will be up from the on both retort birds. We won't expect impacts. There might be short-term impacts for the duration of construction, but we will be assessing that as part of the environmental assessment, and that will be out for review, as Jeff indicated, in early January next year.
Hey, Rebecca, could you just kind of restate the first part of your answer? There was some back feedback on the first part. You started to come in clear at the end.
Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, to summarize, as part of the environmental assessment, we will be looking at impacts to both those resources, fisheries, and migratory birds. It's likely that we wouldn't expect any kind of lasting long-term impacts from the alternatives, but it is possible that we would experience some short-term adverse effects to fisheries and migratory birds during the construction of those alternatives.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. And Tyler, if you have any follow-up questions to that, please go ahead and chat them in, or we can call on you in just a spell. I'd like to open the phone to, open the lines to anybody on the phone. We have a couple phone onlys. They might be staffers. I don't know the numbers, 402-9 something. And then we have a 701-4 with an ending in 46. So if either of those are numbers of our guests who would like to speak up, please unmute yourself and have a moment. Meanwhile, Todd has just chatted in the information about the annual operations plan meeting. Let's see. What's the date? Oh, there it is. Thank you, Todd. April 11th, Monday at 6 p.m. Central Time. You can find that information on our website. I'll try to find that for you while we continue the meeting if you don't know that all the other information. I think they're also doing it virtually. Todd, do you know if there's a virtual connection?
I do not know right offhand, but I can post the link to the public notice.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so Ken, I'm going to unmute you and you go ahead and ask your question or state your comment. Let's test your sound. Okay.
How about now? Okay.
Ah, that's good.
I think I'm getting an echo. I did send it through chat also, but my question is, on the first slide, you identified two entities as cooperating entities, GDU and Bureau of Reclamation. What do you mean by cooperating entity? Does that have a legal meaning in the context of this project? And to follow up on that, is the state of North Dakota represented through the state Department of Water Resources as a cooperating entity?
See if I'm off mute. Yeah, this is Jeff. Rebecca, do you want to answer the first part of that in terms of whether there's a legal meaning to cooperating agency under the National Environmental Policy Act? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's correct. So there is a legal connotation to that under the National Environmental Policy Act. A cooperating agency is somebody who is identified as either having special expertise or jurisdiction. And then other agencies, that would participate, we would consider them participating agencies. But cooperating agency is a special designation.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
And we did formalize that also. So there's like an agreement that we signed, and we meet regularly to share information And then I don't know if we got the second part of your question, Ken. I apologize. Did we get it, or could you restate it?
I'll go ahead and read it, Ken, if that's easier, since you were on feedback. The second question is the North Dakota Department of Water Resources
Oh, yeah.
a cooperating entity?
So we did invite them to be cooperating agency as well, and they deferred to GDU, and GDU is cooperating on their behalf.
Okay. The floor is open if somebody wants to come off mute or chat into the box. There is another phone number. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dwayne Poole. I'm the economist for the Department of Water Resources State Water Commission. I have two questions and a comment. First question would be, when you're looking at the pool differential model, is there a lower limit or a floor to how far down you would take Audubon and it no longer be necessary to maintain that 43-foot differential?
Ryan, do you have thoughts on that?
So the question would be, is there a lowest point where we wouldn't need to bring Audubon any further down?
Yeah, where that differential would be, you move the water level back far enough that the pressure's not there, or it's too far of a distance to travel, or any. I'm just curious whether there's a lower limit to how far you continue to maintain that differential.
So the
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I think we're just tracking that 43-foot compared to Lake Sakakawea. So the lowest SAC level we're looking at, shown on that graphic earlier, was 1780. So it'd be that plus 43 feet is the lowest we can envision Audubon.
Okay. The other one,
okay.
Sorry, my next question was with relation to building the berms. Would impacts to current design or other infrastructure being designed and built, like the NAS intake, be considered in or interrupt the building of those berms?
So I think I can answer.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan. I think we could both answer it, but you could probably answer it better. Go ahead.
Yes, we're aware of the incoming NAS intake, anticipating that to be built in the next few years. And absolutely, we're considering that in these designs. So.
Okay, and then my third thing is more a statement than a question, and that's with respect to, I'm assuming there's some economic impact analysis that will be preceding a benefit cost analysis as this project moves forward, and I would be interested in following along on that process, understanding what you're developing and the methodologies being applied. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Okay. Russ, I'll go ahead and ask the question from Russ. It's in the chat, but just in case. Russ Buckholz, who from North Dakota? It sounds like is on the core review board. Are there any private entities or associations, and is that a possibility? And Mr. Buckholz, feel free to come off mute if you can, if you want to.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, yeah, I'm just checking to see as far as on the core review board. You mentioned that what entities are on there from North Dakota? You know, representing the North Dakota, I'll say, side of it. Are there any?
So I can talk a little bit about our review process that we anticipate for the study and maybe answer your question, Mr. Buckles. So as part of the cooperating agreement that we have with GD, CD, and BOR, we are asking that they do some review of our preliminary results once we have those results, ready for them. And we're hoping that sort of acts as a good state level sort of review to get their comments before we enter into the standard Corps of Engineers review processes. And those are the review processes I was referring to on the one slide towards the end. And there's really no state board or anything like that involved at that point. We do what we call it is a district quality review, which is Omaha District reviewing the report. And then we have a group from outside Omaha District, but inside the Corps that reviews it. And then there's another layer of review from our higher ups, like our headquarters. So that's our review process. And like I said, we are hoping that the state and the BOR can review what we're doing. Over.
Okay, thanks. I was just wondering, those that had skin in the game, as far as, what kind of representation we're going to have from the North Dakota side.
Okay,
Right.
anybody else
Yep.
to pitch in on that one? Jeff? You good?
Yeah, I think he explained it. That was just my concern.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, is there anybody else? You can, we'll just take a pause here and let you think about what's up. And I posted in the address for mailing comment as well as the email address. I'll go ahead and post that again in case you have to leave or if you missed that. And feel free to sign out anytime you'd like. We'll be just hanging on here waiting for more comments and questions. I appreciate your time. Jeff, do you want to answer Mr. Smith's question?
Will a recording of this presentation be posted at a later date? Yeah, we haven't talked about posting the recording. I think we could do that. I don't know why we wouldn't be able to. Yeah, we will plan on posting it. We have done that in the past, so let's go ahead and put that on our to-do list, unless there's any reasons that anyone can think of that we wouldn't.
And the slides will be on the
website
as well.
Right. Yeah, we'll post the recording and the slides.
And I will put the web link to the Snake Creek. If that is active, I'll go look for that right now and put in the website link for you here. So Jeff, there's a question there from Mr. Carufel. You want to go ahead and read that out while I type in this web link?
Yeah, Brian, this sounds like a question for you. I'll go ahead and read it. And the question is, have seepage and piping been observed, or is it inferred from something like a model?
Great. Yep. So again, a unique thing about this embankment is how we have the lake on both sides. For many dams and levees, you can walk the dry side and see the beginning of the piping and take action then. For Snake Creek, in the loading condition we're talking about, the toe is still underwater, so we wouldn't be able to see that initial piping where the sand is coming up from the foundation. But we do have instruments underwater which give us an indication of the pressure in the foundation. And between that and last time we drilled wells, we're able to see that there is a significant amount of pressure that can build up in those higher pool differentials. So we're planning ahead for if we face the new record differential, what measures can we take?
Okay, great.
And I'd like to reiterate again that so we always aim to further reduce risk. Snake Creek does not have an imminent high risk, even at that 43 foot. We're not anticipating a dam failure.
Okay. We'll stay on a little longer. Again, feel free to chat in your question or come off mute and speak up to the group.
Did you decide to drop off? Thanks again for attending. Well, any last call? I guess this will, maybe we can make a last call for questions or comments. A lot of people have dropped off. Yeah, are there any final questions or comments for the group? Greg, do you think we can close the public meeting, or should we wait the last 15 minutes? What's the, yeah, what do we do if people are dropping off? Close it out? Okay. Yeah. Anybody on the line have anything to add or any questions before we close out the meeting? I appreciate the good questions, and I really appreciate the core team who's on the line who helped answer questions. Yeah, I'm satisfied. All right. Amy, I think you can go ahead and stop recording.